All right, good morning. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches, Kiddushin, Daf Yomi. We're starting at about the 10th line, the first of the long lines on the page. And now we're going to be analyzing the Shita of Beis Hillel. Yesterday we spent some time analyzing Beis Shammai. How did he get to the higher level of dinar, that higher level of threshold to get married? And we paskin like Beis Hillel, this is our material over here, which is that we paskin in Bepruta. So let's get into this. Stavar of Yosef Lemeimar. He said pruta koldu, pruta of any amount. What does this mean? This means a pruta that's reflective of the culture. So let's say in America, we would call the pruta a penny. In England, it would be a pence, is it a pence? Whatever the smallest one is. I almost sounded smart for a second. So it doesn't matter. His point is that whatever societally is considered to be the pruta, then that's considered to be enough for Kiddushin. Amalei Abaye. That's not possible. What we have in our Mishnah, our very Mishnah spoke about this. That's a very formulaic number. It's 1/8 of an Isar HaYitalki. That's not relative to the American US dollar, to the Canadian dollar. Not at all. It seems to be very measured. If you want to say that measure was only meant for Dor Shel Moshe, but in our generations, it's whatever people establish. We have the value of the dollar in our climate, in our world. So maybe that's what is the determining factor for Kiddushin. And what was listed in our Mishnah was just Moshe. That's what just happened with Dor Shel Moshe. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Amar shiur of Simoi bedoro kama pruta. When Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rav Simoi said that in his generation a pruta had an objective value. It wasn't relative to the market. What was the objective value? Echad mishmona b'Yisrael ha'Italki, and that was not Moshe Rabbeinu's generation. And similarly, b'chiyasa Rabin, Amar Rav Dustai v'Rav Yanai v'Rav Oshtayim, she'aru kam hava pruta in their generation, echad mishisha b'Yisrael ha'Italki. It was either 1/6 or 1/8, but it was always measured against the Yisrael ha'Italki. It was not measured against the local currency. So if that's true, you can't say that it's going to fluctuate with the times. Kash against Rav Yosef, that's the first line where we started. That Rav Yosef wanted to say Pruta Koldu, you're not allowed to say that. So Amar Le, Rav Yosef would respond to the question against him, Ihachi, Ainu de Tanina. If this is true what you're saying, then we've already have a price that's going to conflict. This price says, Say v'chashov kama prutos b'shnei slaim. You might have seen these currency charts where a penny equals a nickel equals 5 cents, a dime equals 10 pennies. So we're not going to do all the math because we're not going to remember the names anyway. I've learned them 50 times and I still don't remember any of the names. But for the sake of time and because I don't have any charts in front of me, we're just going to assume the math is true here. It says, Sevachashov kama prutos b'shnei slaim. How many pennies are there in, let's say, a $100 bill? It's a pretty big spread between the two types of currency. It says the Brisa, Yoser me'alpayim, more than 2,000. But really, that's not true. Hashta really alpayim lohavin. It's actually about 1,500 prutos in a selah. Why are you saying that it's yeser me alpayim karilu? It must be. We view this pruta in this generation. We must view it by the cultural norms because we see that it must have fluctuated. Because if you do the math according to the Isar HaYitalki, the 1/8 of Isar HaYitalki, it would end up being that there's only 1,500 prutos to a selah, not more than 2,000. Amar lahu ahu saba. Ana tanina lo. I actually have that Bryce in my memory a little different. Karov le'alpayim, that it's actually close to 2,000, not that it's more than 2,000. That's a typo. Then the Gemara says, so at the end of the day, even if you want to say it's close to 2,000, it's really not close to 2,000. Why? Because the Gemara says, Alpha v'chamesh mea v'tlasin v'shisa hu dehavya. It's really 1,536 prutos to a selah. That's not karov. That's 75% of the way there. That's not Karov. Karov is 1900. Karov is 1950. It's not. This is not correct. Says the Gemara. No, not really. Since we passed over the halfway mark, because that's the case, therefore Karov le'alpayim karile. In that brisa, it's considered appropriate that it was Karov le'alpayim. Now we're going to be analyzing this slight oddity that we just came across, which is that we had Rav Dimi saying that in his generation it was 1/8, and we had Ravin saying that it was 1/6. And we're gonna just analyze this quickly. Gufa, a third of the way down at the right here, it says, Ki asa Rav Dimi. We had just quoted the line of Rav Dimi. Amar, he had said, Shir Rav Simoi Bedoro Kamahi Pruta, Echad Mishmona Beisar Haitalki. That Rav Dimi had said that Rav Simoi held in his generation that a Pruta was 1/8 of an Isar. And Vichi Asa Ravin Amar Shir Rav Dustay Rav Yanai Rav Oshaya Kamahi Pruta, Echad Mishisha Beisar Haitalki. Says the Gemara that perhaps we have a machlokes, because one says that a pruta is 1/6 of Isar Haitalki, and one says that it's 1/8 of an Isar Haitalki. Amar le Abaye le Rav Dimi. Nema, perhaps we should say, At v'Ravin, you Rav Dimi, and Ravin, beplugta dahani tanoi kam miflagisu. Perhaps you're arguing with the following, machlokes tanoim. And here is where the math only works with a chart, so you'll have to just trust me on this one. The Tanya, halfway down, the Brisa reads as follows. Pruta she'amru chachamim. When we are talking about a pruta, the pruta with which a woman can get married in the name of Beis Hillel, that's echad mishmona be'isar ha'italki. That's 1/8 of the isar ha'italki, this Italian coin. And says the Gemara, here are all the stages. Sheish ma'a kesef dinar. There are 6 ma of kesef in a dinar. And a ma is shnei pundionin. And a pundion is shnei isarin. And an isar is shnei musmisin. And a mas mes is shnei kuntronkin. And a kuntronk is shnei prutos. Nimtza pruta achas mishmona be'isar ha'italki. If you take that chart and you do that math, you'll find that a pruta is 1/8 of an isar ha'italki. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, not really. Shlosha hadrasin lema, shnei hansin lahadris, shnei shamnin lahanitz, beis prutos l'shamin. And when you do the math according to his currencies, it comes out a little different. Nimsa pruta achas mi shisha b'isar ha'italki. So lema, perhaps we should say, the mar amar ketanakama, that Rav Dimi holds like the Tanakama of 1/8. The Ravin Amar Kerashbag, who ended up saying 1/6, and they're just it's really just different currencies, it seems. So to this, the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Amar Le, no, Bein Didi Ubein Ravin Aliba the Tanakama. Everyone agrees that we're within the camp of the Tanakama and not Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Velo kasha, Haida Aikor Isuri, Haida Zol Isuri. Each of them were referring to a time frame where the Isur was either more expensive or less expensive, but all within the Tanakama's camp. Ada Aikor Isuri kum esrim ve'arba bezuza. When the Isar is up to 24 zuz for every Isar, so then under those circumstances, when the market is 24 zuz like that, that's 1/8. That's the shita that we saw earlier, that it's echad mishmona mi-isar ha'italki. And hadazol, when the isur is on a lower level, kum tlasin v'trein b'zuz, it's cheaper. You can get 32 zuz for the dollar, as it were, and therefore that's 1/6. So that's how the Gemara concludes, is that there really is no machlokes. This is really a sidebar conversation. It really is more tangential. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, we're going back to cases of Kiddushin. Kitcha b'tmara. If a man gets married to a woman, or tries at least, with a single date, he hands her a date and says, Harad mikudesha sibe tamar zukidas Moshe v'Yisrael. So says the Gemara, Afilu omed kur tamarim bedinar, even if the entire kur was 1 dinar, and therefore one date is nothing, it's way less than a shava pruta, the halacha is mikudeshas. Why? We've been learning shitas Beis Hillel. We know that this should not be the case. Why would we say that? So to this, the Gemara says, because of the following. Shema shava pruta b'madai. Perhaps in another place where they don't even sell dates. In other words, this is more of a hot commodity. We have a supply and demand issue. I've seen this in my work where some of the programs that the OU offers, smaller communities eat them up because they're smaller. Bigger communities are like, we're over-programmed. We don't need you. Same thing. Oh, you sell dates? My gosh. We don't have any of them in Madai. So therefore, by me, that's way more than a pruta. Pashat. I would love that. So then maybe perhaps in Madai, because in Madai that would be valuable, supply and demand, therefore they should be married. Says the Gemara, that's a cute svara, but what about the fact that our mission doesn't say that? Go on tanan. Beis Hillel omrim, bepruta, uveshava pruta. Who cares what happens in Madai? We don't live in Madai. So therefore, they should not be married. Lokasha, habe kiddushe vadai, habe kiddushe safek. Says the Gemara, one's talking about kiddushe vadai, which this would not be, but there is also an element of kiddushe safek. In other words, we do partially consider the fact that in Madai it would be worth more money, and therefore we consider there to be a safek kiddushin. Ahu Gavra, there was a case scenario, and we're going to come back to the kiddushe vadai and kiddushe safek in a moment. Ahu Gavra, there was a man, ta'aktish bezavda de urdi, who got engaged to a woman with a collection of rags of cloth. Maybe if you could imagine from like just like a collection of rags, maybe to clean up paint. Yeah, 5 or 6 rags in a row. Okay. Yasi Rav Simi Bar Chia Kame de Rav. He was looking at it to try and determine what it is. And he called it out. In. Just depends. Just go figure it out. Let's say it's a penny per ounce and it's 5 ounces. Okay. So if 5 ounces is a shavapruta, you're married. If it's not, then it's not. The last pay shavapruta lo. How can you say that if there isn't going to be a shavapruta? How can you say that that's the case? After all, the Amar Shmuel, Chashinan. We just saw above that we are concerned about Madai. So let's say, for example, if I live in Kansas, so then these 5 painter's rags in Kansas, they sell thousands of them, tons of them. That's fine. But over here, we have a different issue that in my city, they sell none. So why is it that Shmuel isn't concerned about this suffix? It says the Gemara, lo kasha, habek dushe vadai, habek dushe suffix. It just depends. One's talking about kedushe vadai, and one is talking about kedushe suffix. Another story. Ahu Gabra, de aktish be'avna de kuchla. He got engaged with a blue stone. Like the first normal thing we've seen anyone get engaged with since the beginning of the Maseches. Yasir Rav Chizda become a shiur. He was looking at the blue stone and he was analyzing it to determine its value. If the blue stone is worth a shavapruta, so this is what Rav Chizda said, then yes, lo. And if not, then they're not married. It just depends on the dollar value. Very simple. Asks the Gemara, what about Shmuel? Lo. Amar Shmuel Chashinan. What about the fact that Shmuel said that we should be concerned about other communities where this item would be more valuable? Says the Gemara, Rav Chizda lo savar lo the Shmuel, lo savar le the Shmuel. Rav Chizda doesn't agree with Shmuel, and he just holds that it's purely based on this market. It's based on the value of this item. If it's a shavapruta, they're married. If it's not a shavapruta, they're not married. This story of the blue stone continues. Amar le ime. The mother of the bride said to Rav Chizda, that day, the kitcha, when they got married with that blue stone, it was actually a shavapruta. And therefore, if there were to have been any other Kiddushins, it wouldn't have been chal. Amar la, lav kol kaminach the asra sla basra. You're not able to ruin another marriage because of your claim about the blue stone. After we're all on the top of Daf Yud Beis and Beis, the Gemara says, Lav Hainu, isn't this the case of the Yehudis to be with Rav Chia? This is the story of Yehudis, who was the wife of Rav Chia. Tahavila Tsar Leda. She had a lot of pain in Leda. Amrale, and she said to him, Amrali Aim, my mother told me, Kabil bich avuch Kiddushe Kizutras, that you had already taken Kiddushin from another woman. And I didn't know about that. So maybe we shouldn't be married. It says the Gemara, Amarla, Lav Kol Community Imach Atras Lichilavoy. Your mother is not allowed to step in now and make a claim to say that we are not actually married. Why is it that you'd say that that's not necessarily going to work? Maybe, as Rav Chizda had said earlier, that he doesn't hold of Shmuel. Shmuel said that we're not only concerned about the pricing in our community, we're concerned about the pricing in other communities. That's the difference between here and Madai, where in Madai they sell no dates. Rav Chizda says, I'm not hearing it. It's market value in Chicago, Kansas, wherever you live. If it's a pruta, it is. Then if it isn't, it isn't. It doesn't matter. After all, it's possible. It could be that if you look back at the what we have now, is the historical data on every single transaction that's ever taken place in regards to the market. We could look back on May 15th and see exactly what the value was of the blue stone. Says the Gemara, it's true, but Hashda, at this moment, Miha, lo lisnu, come on, those Edim are not in front of me, and I'm not worried about that. And therefore, says the Gemara, Lav Hainu de Rav Chanina. This is very similar to the sheet of Rav Chanina. Domer Rav Chanina, you're going to say the Edim are elsewhere and we're going to make them aser. We learned about this a while ago. This story is found in Maseches Ksubis. This was the story about Shmuel, where a couple of his daughters were taken captive and they ended up escaping. And they walked into the Beis Medrash and they shared 2 pieces of information. First of all, we were captured. And second of all, we were not violated. So we trust both pieces of information. And the reason why we trust that is that even though there may be witnesses out there, but they're not here. So the fact that the witnesses aren't present doesn't introduce enough of a risk for me to actually be concerned. Abaye v'Rava lo svira lahu lahad Rav Chizda. But Abaye and Rava don't agree to this din of Rav Chizda that if the Edim aren't present, that we don't care about them. We do care about them. In other words, Abaye and Rava are concerned that if there are witnesses out there, there should be an element of safek. Imikilu b'shvuya, says the Gemara. Wait, because if in fact we were makel by a shvuya, which maybe we should be, because she could have made herself very unappealing, and maybe the captors didn't want to end up being with her. But nekel be'eshes ish, you want to be makel by the case of Reb Chizda, by the case of Shmuel's daughters. I understand, but here we're talking about the possibility that these people are actually married with the blue stone. You're going to be makel over here and say that there's a 0% chance that they're married. There are Edom out there. So you have to split the cases. You can't say that the case of not having Edom and Shmuel's daughters captives is the same as the case of women who might actually be married. We're talking about straight up mamzerus. It's a huge difference. So this family with the blue stone, there were actually some people who remained in Surah after the story took place. The rabbi said, don't touch this family, because there could be real mamzerim. They're really good, because if the blue stone had Edom, if the Edom count, then Shabai and Rava were the ones who were kind of shifting the tides there. They were of the opinion that we don't want to be in a scenario where this is going to get us in trouble, where there's mamzeros. Says the Gemara, V'lav mishum Yisfir lehu Shmuel. It's not because that they held of Shmuel. Ela mishum Yisfir le'Abai v'Rava. So this is what the Gemara means, that we're not worried about Shmuel's opinion, that perhaps the value of this is different in another study, which we were discussing on the bottom of the previous page, but rather like Abaye, that we are not concerned with, that we are concerned that there might be an aid out there, and there might be another version of the story that is actually true. Another story, third of the way down on Yud Beis, we'll be stopping about a quarter of the way down on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, and then later this morning I'm going to do one more recording for Shabbos. A man got engaged with a stalk of a myrtle branch in the shuk, in a public place. What is the din in such a case where someone gets engaged like this in the public square? He said to him, Nagde kirav. This man should get lashes like Rav. Okay, what does that mean? Says the Gemara, not only should he get lashes, but v'atzrich gita k'Shmuel. And he also needs to get like Shmuel. What is the part about Rav? The Rav mangid, when would Rav give malkos al demakadesh beshuka? A man who gets engaged in a public place. What does that mean? You can't get proposed in the United Center. If you propose in the United Center on screen, Arad Mekudesha said, when you get malkos from the Chachamim, consider a lack of tznius. Okay. The al demakadesh bebia, a couple that gets married with bia, the Mefarshim explain when there's a lack of context of marriage. It's a first meeting. It's not considered the appropriate way to do things. It's not that there's no chalos of a kiddushin. There is a chalos of a kiddushin, but it's not the right way to do this. Couples who marry without discussing the terms of their marriage first. If a man sends out a get and then is mavatel the get, he should also get lashes. And a man who was forced to give a get by Bezdin, and Masar Moda, he starts calling out the Bezdin negatively. If they make the rabbis crazy when they're in the process of their divorces. And for a man who was put into Cherem for 30 days and didn't improve his behavior. This is the laundry list of times that Rav was of the opinion that a person would have to get malkos. Now, in the last of these cases, where the chassan was living in his father-in-law's house, the concern that the Rishonim explain is whether or not there would be a physical relationship between the son-in-law and the mother-in-law. And says the Gemara as a qualification on this last case, halfway down a little bit more, the dayer in, that's if he lives in the house. Chalif flow. But if he just comes over for dinner, he just comes over for a little bit, that's not considered to be problematic. Says the Gemara, there was this chassan who simply walked by the door of the house of his father-in-law, and he did get malkos by Rav Sheshes. So which one is it? Is it chalif or dayer? Well, where do we have the halachic concerns? So says the Gemara, no, that woman already had a rumor about her. Kahu medam havas daima. There was already a rumor about her, about chamse minei, about the mother-in-law and the son-in-law, and therefore in that case there were more. Rav Sheshes was more strict, and he says you guys need to stay away from each other. If you as much as walk down that block, I'm giving you malkos. Nahardoi Amre, they said that this list of Rab was actually different. The Kulhu Loman Gid Rab would only give Malkos Ela al Mekadesh Babia below Shiduche. If they would have Tashma Shamita without terms and conditions, without speaking things out. Yikada Amre, no, Vafilu B'Shiduche Nami, Mishum Pritzusa. Even if there were Shiduche, but they got married through Bia, doesn't matter. Even if you spoke out your terms and conditions, it is Mishum Pritzusa. This is not something that's easy to do l'shem shamayim. Be l'shem kiddushin. It's not. I read Mekudeshes Liba V'Yezu Kudas Moshe V'Yisrael. It's you have to be a top shelf person. It's not a simple thing, and the Gemara doesn't recommend it. 12 lines or so from the bottom. Au Gavra the Kaddish B'Tifsa Da'asa. The Gemara says that a man proposed to a woman with a mat that was made out of myrtle. And Amar Lahu, they said to him, this is nothing. It's cheap. This is a penny. It's not even a pruta. Amar Lahu, after she had received it, he said to them in a response, don't worry. Tiktosh, she'll be considered to be married. I hid 4 zuz inside the mattress. So I gave her this mat. The mat itself is not a shava pruta. And after she received the mat, she learned that there were 4 zuz inside the mat. So the mattress itself is not a shava pruta, but with its contents, it's more than a shava pruta. So shaklasa v'ishtika, she had taken it and she hadn't said anything. Amar Rava, avashtikusa de la'achar matan mos. Her silence after she received it. Nobody knows what that means. She didn't even know the 4 zuz were in there. So if I give you something, a harad mikudeshes, that you think it's cubic zirconium and it's worth $1 and it's really a diamond and it's worth $10,000, but you don't know, but you think it's cubic zirconium, your silence doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean you want to be married. You don't know what it is. You think it's less than a shava pruta. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, where do I know this from? Mina aminala. How do I know this idea that shtika is not an indicator of marriage in a case like this? The Tanya, the Gemara says, Amar la, if a man says to a woman, Kansi sela zu bipikadon, I'm giving you a sela, that's a large amount of money, and I'd like you to please hold it as collateral. The Chazar ba'amar la, he's kachi libo, and then he says in the next sentence, and I want you to marry me. Okay, so here's the Bryce's distinction. 4 lines from the bottom. B'shas matan ma'os. If he said this to her as he was handing her the pikadon, so it's all in motion. Harad mikudeshes li v'sela zu pikadon kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. Take this. I'd like you to hold it. Okay. So if it's b'shas matan ma'os mikudeshes, no problem. But le'achar matan ma'os, if it was already in her hand, first I said, kanti sela zu pikadon. She's holding the sela. Once she's holding it, I then say harat mekudeshes li. So then the Gemara says ratisa mekudeshes, lo ratisa ena mekudeshes. If she wants to be married, she can be, and if she doesn't, she won't be. It's a dealer's choice. Says the Gemara, what is this language of ratisa? My ratisa umay lo ratisa. What does it mean that they want to get married or don't want to get married? Ilema. If you want to say that ratisa is the amra in, that she says after she received it. Remember, here's the flow of events. I give this to her as a pikadon. And then she's holding it already. Let's say I'm the woman, I'm holding it, I got the money. And then you look at me and say, will you marry me? I'll be like, what does ratisa mean? Do I have to say yes? What's ratisa? So the Gemara says, Ilema ratisa de amra in, lo ratisa de amra lo. If you want to say that it's just clear, she's either saying yes or she's saying no. Michlal, what's implied from there is the resha, that even ki amra lo, nami havu Kiddushin, as we turn to the top of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. There is an implication that even in the first case, as long as she accepts it, she'd be mekudeshes, even if she says lo. And the first case was a case where he gave her b'shas matan mos. And in that case, it says mekudeshes, seemingly without her words. Her words may not matter. If she accepts it, she accepts it. So if I'm handing this to a woman, and I've said, I want to give this to you as collateral, and will you marry me? And she says no, and then takes it. So that should not work. But the Mishnah has an implication that if the Seifa says that lo ratasa is the amra lo, bechlal dereisha ki amra lo nami havu Kiddushin, and the Gemara says that's impossible. Amai, why would it be Kiddushin if she said no? After all, b'ha ka amra lo, she said I don't want to marry you, even if she took it, doesn't matter. Elolav ratasa de amra in. It must be that in the Seifa of the Brisa, that when she says ratasa, yes, it does mean that she said yes, I want to marry you. And lo ratisa, what did it mean in the Seif of the Brisa when she said, I don't want to marry you? That's the ishtika mishaska. She was silent. Ushma mina, says Rava, from here I'm able to see that shtika de la'achar matan ma'o, lo klum hi at all. Nothing at all. Says the Gemara, Kashu ba befum nahara mishmei Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. The Gemara says the comparison of this case between Pikadon and Kiddushin are not at all similar. Why? Midami? How can you learn these two cases from one another? Hasam betoras Pikadon yahavinula, yavinu nehala. In the first case, he said to her, I'd like for you to please watch this sela as a Pikadon. Stavra, she thought, I can't even throw it down to turn down the marriage, because if I break it, I'll have to buy it. Ishadina lehu umispiri nechayavna behu. If I take the Kiddushin, and the best way for me to show him that I don't want to marry him is to throw it on the ground, but I might ruin it and become chayiv in it. So by a Pikadon, she might have had an ulterior motive to take it without wanting to be married. But hacha betoras Kiddushin yavinu nihala. But if it's done betoras Kiddushin, v'isa delo nihala lishdinu. She could have thrown it on the ground, because if a man tries to propose and he gives you a very expensive chihuli artwork that's made out of glass, you can throw it on the ground. I don't want to marry you. Whole thing shatters, your putter. So she should know that there's a difference between holding something bibikadon and getting married. When it's bibikadon, if you drop it, you're chayiv. But if a man gives a woman an item to be mikudeshes and she doesn't want to marry, she can throw it on the ground and they're done. This says the Gemara. Therefore, you can't compare the two cases. Parich Rabachai. He says, Atu kulhu nashe dina gemirin. You think every woman sitting and pounding shots, they know every fine-tuned distinction of what they can break and what they can't break. That's a huge subtlety. Nobody knows this stuff, men or women. Nobody knows it. It's like gentle halacha. It says the Gemara, hachanami svara. Here, at least she could have held, she might have thought the same exact thing in this case, even by Kiddushin, that if I break it, I'll have to buy it, and therefore I'm not going to throw it down. What would be the din in this case? We never heard this line of Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua, the distinction question between Pikadon and Kiddushin. You who've heard of this opinion, you should remain concerned about it. Anyone who lives in my country doesn't need to worry about it at all. We'll stop right here. I'm going to record another blot a little bit later this morning and post for Shabbos. Wishing you all a beautiful day and a beautiful Shabbos.